Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Ksenia Kuzmina. I'm Program Manager at the Russian International Affairs Council, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all our distinguished speakers, and the audience who follows us online on YouTube and Facebook at the second roundtable co-organized by the Russian International Affairs Council and the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs from Nepal. While our first webinar mostly dealt with bilateral Russia-Nepal relations, today we'll be looking at a broader regional perspective and analyzing Russia's interests in South Asia and the overall situation in South Asia nowadays, when the region is badly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic and the starting global crisis stemming from both the pandemic reasons and other structural reasons. And we will be also looking at the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation potential and its activities. It has been for many years criticized due to its inactivity, but this recent months it has a bit of a brightened up, if we could say, against the background of the pandemic. And we will be also looking at the possibilities of Russia's cooperation with the SAARC, as it has already expressed interests in gaining the observer status, but with the discussions with the SAARC's efficiency, the issue remains whether it is to happen and whether it is to bring some fruitful results. Today, I have to inform you that we have some changes in the composition of our speakers. Unfortunately, two distinguished speakers, one from Russia and one from Nepal, couldn't join us today, but we have on board today Dr. Alexey Kupriyanov, Senior Research Fellow at the Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations of Russian Academy of Sciences, and Elena Shaflai, Analyst of Laboratory of International Trends Analysis and lecturer of English at the MGIMO University from Russia, joining us. We also have Professor Datesh Parulikar, Assistant Professor at the School of International and Area Studies at Goa University, and Ms. Angana Gukharoy, Research Associate at Delhi Policy Group. And first, I'd like to give floor to Dr. Kupriyanov for his remarks. Please, Alexei.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Ksenia. Dear friends, colleagues, I'm glad to see you all in good health. The pandemic turned out to be a difficult test for all of us, but we withstood it, and I hope in the end we'll return to our usual personal format of meetings. So I would like to start my speech by describing Russian imperatives. Russia, having gone through difficult times in the 90s, has emerged from the crisis and is now restoring the influence, paying, of course, attention to South Asia. It did this for two reasons. The first is natural desire to use the foundation laid during the Soviet era in order to increase its influence in South Asia and regain as many positions as possible. The Soviet Union actively helped the countries of South Asia to develop industry and agriculture. It built hospitals, schools, printed textbooks for children, and a lot of doctors and engineers from South Asian countries studied in Moscow and other Soviet cities. Now Russia, having grown stronger after the crisis, want to use its infrastructural and human capital to strengthen ties. I think it's quite natural. The second is the Russian new strategy, which is aimed at creating a zone of peace and mutually beneficial trade in Eurasia. Russia is promoting the strategy of Great Eurasia, where all countries belonging to different cultures and civilizations must conduct mutually beneficial trade and abandon wars with each other. Russia has achieved defense efficiency, I think, and it can defend itself and now wants to concentrate on economic development, for which it needs a calm environment. For Russia, therefore, peace between the countries of South Asia and the pacification of hotspots such as Kashmir are very important. If the states of South Asia, primarily India and Pakistan, are at enmity with each other, it will not be possible to build a peaceful Greater Eurasia. At the same time, it's necessary to understand that Moscow's resources are limited and they are much less than the resources of the USSR were. And Moscow is increasing its role in South Asia very slowly, since Russia simply cannot afford to concentrate resources and attention on a region that is not, in the moment, is paramount for it. South Asia has never been a calm region, of course, but now the situation is even more complicated because of the beginning of the new Cold War between the United States and China, because China needs to secure a vital important route for raw materials, oil, gas from Africa and the Persian Gulf, which means that it breaks into Indian security zone. And for the United States, in turn, it's beneficial to inflate the contradictions between China and its neighbors in order to divert Chinese attention and resources from the development of the Navy and from expansion in the Pacific Ocean. Russia, I think, is extremely interested in the SAARC to live and prosper, since SAARC, on the one hand, contributes to stability in South Asia, and on the other hand, is an indicator of the stability. Therefore, Russia has actively interacted and will interact both with SAARC as an international organization and on bilateral basis with its member countries. Unfortunately, such a well-started format as SAARC lately does not give grounds for optimism because in recent years, economic benefits have been increasingly sacrificed to political short-term issues, and the development of SAARC has significantly slowed due to disagreements between India and Pakistan. I am very glad that during the pandemic, the symptoms of SAARC resurgence appeared, but unfortunately, I must speak here from the pessimistic position because the pandemic marked the revival of regional associations almost all over the world, and this is understandable because the pandemic meant fall of economy, a lot of economic problems, the need to find support in these conditions, and it's logical that regional associations has become the mainstay. And these associations are tools that allow to update and increase trade in order to win back the consequences of quarantine as soon as possible. It's also logical that they became the main format within which states interacted to combat COVID, since unlike military blocs, they didn't carry the danger of losing part of states' sovereignty and so on, but allowed them to interact along long-established routes using existing mechanisms. The problem is that I'm not sure if this format will continue after the pandemic is over. Perhaps this increased attention to regional associations is just a natural response to the challenge. When the challenge disappears, the level of attention will also decrease. Because the main problems of SAARC, primarily the problems between India and Pakistan, have not disappeared anywhere. Moreover, these problems have been added to them, primarily the difficulties in relations between India and Nepal, for example. Given the existing problems, the prospect of for SAARC look rather vague, primarily because India, as I see it, as a leading driver of the South Asia economy due to problems with Pakistan, is clearly trying to move away from focusing on SAARC, paying more and more attention to other projects. For example, BIMSTEC. Well, and therefore Russia, while consistently showing, of course, an interest in becoming an observer country, cannot rely only on SAARC, logically betting on the development of bilateral relations. In general, it seems to me that any economic initiative of Russia in the region will, one way or another way, lead to an increase in economic connectivity with SAARC countries, of course, including two main trade routes to Vladivostok, the North-South corridor. The more Russian business is present in the region, the stronger ties Russia has with SAARC, of course. But we need to understand that while Russia in South Asia is primarily interested in security issues, and the SAARC countries are no exception. Russia is worried about the development of the situation in Afghanistan, the conflict between India and Pakistan, the expanding antagonism between India and China, and the possible interference of external players in regional affairs, and so on, so on, so on. I believe that Russia-SAARC interaction should follow two main tracks. First, the settlement of security issues, the fight against terrorism and piracy, non-traditional threats, Russian assistance to resolve difficult situations, for example, maybe providing a platform for meetings, and socio-cultural interaction, because South Asia, primarily India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives are very popular in Russia, both as a tourist destination as a cultural phenomenon. Unfortunately, far fewer people from the SAARC countries travel to Russia than the Russians to the SAARC countries. And the ideas about Russian culture among the inhabitants of the SAARC countries are often very vague. There are positive signals, I think. For example, they talk about easing the visa regime for most of SAARC countries. And recently, the new head of Rossотрудничества was appointed, his grandson of the former Prime Minister Primakov, the great specialist in South Asia, and we expect more work in the region. But in general, to conclude, I can only repeat that Russia is ready to contact and work together with the SAARC, but the main thing is that the SAARC itself does not split as a structure because of problems inside it. Thank you. Ksenia, I finished.
Thank you so much, Alexei, for your short intervention. Sorry, I must have had some glitch, technical glitch. I hope I haven't been absent for a long time. Thank you so much for highlighting the main points of Russia's national interests and Russia's current positions. Do you hear me? Sorry. As for highlighting the main points of Russia's national interest and the current situation in the SAARC region. I'm happy to give floor to our next speaker, Professor Tesh Prabhu Parulikar, Assistant Professor at School of International and Area Studies and Goa University. Please, Professor Parulikar, the floor is yours.
Can I be clearly heard? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So good morning to our friends.
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Thank you. So good morning to our esteemed friends in Russia and good afternoon to everyone from India. At the outset, let me thank both RIAC and AIDIA for inviting me to provide this perspective on this particular theme. Now, let me essentially divide my presentation into two sections. The first really concerns trying to look at Russia and SAARC and what may or may not happen between them in the context of the problems that SAARC faces right now, and also Russian outlook towards South Asia. And in the second half, I will look at some of the dilemmas that face Russia as it tries to chart a policy for South Asia, which requires it to navigate between many of the major powers, both the mainstay powers and extraterritorial powers in South Asia. Now, from the ordinary course of events, one would wonder, why are we discussing Russia and South Asia? Because neither is South Asia contiguous to Russia, nor does Russia have any connectivity pathways, nor has Russia had a history of South Asian institutional involvement going, of course, beyond its partner India. But we live in times of reimagined cartography and delimited geographies, when actually globalization is collapsing space and time. And that's why when we look at functional cooperation, we have to look at powers and we have to look at engagements that go well beyond the contiguity or the geographical proximity of particular regions. Now, looking at SAARC, we all are aware of the problems of SAARC. But what we have seen over the last 5.5 years is while the institutionality of SAARC has gone into limbo, the informal instrumentality of SAARC continues to persevere. And what you have seen in the case of the pandemic is really the fact that you have institutional problems. So going back to the institutionality of SAARC may not happen so soon, and we don't know how far into the foreseeable future, but we can say for sure that SAARC is definitely alive and kicking, because with the creation, of course, with the informal SAARC summit, and subsequently with the SAARC COVID fund that was created, it shows that when it comes to strategic areas of collaboration, those countries who are willing to work together are willing to embrace informal instrumentality. And I think that could actually be the way forward for SAARC in the foreseeable future, because the track record has shown that every time SAARC goes back to institutional formats, there happens to be plenty of grandstanding and all kinds of bilateral disputes coming in, as a result of which the whole SAARC process tends to be stirred up. And that is going to affect potential members coming in. It's also going to affect observers who want to be there. I also don't think that, although it's a fact that Russia has solicited observer status for a long time, the fact remains that this may not be forthcoming. And I say that because the last time when SAARC was paused, actually SAARC was in the process of trying to re-examine its engagements, not only with potential new members, but also with potential observers. And that's because there are 2 or 3 countries coming into the SAARC framework, which actually would take SAARC out of its geopolitical context and would put it in the larger geostrategic context of neighboring regions. For example, you have Iran, which was front runner for membership of SAARC. Obviously, bringing in Iran is going to bring in a different complexity to SAARC and its original vision. Similarly, on the eastern flank, you have Myanmar that was also looking to join SAARC. So bringing Myanmar in also is going to bring in a different complexion in the context of China's role within SAARC or with SAARC countries. And you also have Turkey that was also looking for membership of SAARC. Now, with each of these countries, it may be difficult to revive membership talks, particularly with likes of Turkey, also with Iran, maybe even with Myanmar, given the India-China, kind of dialectic that is playing itself out now. So I think Russia's observer status and Russia's potential membership of SAARC may be a long way away. I also do believe that when it comes to Russia's understanding of South Asia, for a long time, Russia has definitely talked about South Asia in various strategic documents, various doctrines. But this discussion has really been very fleeting. Because what I believe is there is a big difference between giving out a signal and being able to demonstrate real interest. I think if Russia wants to really show real interest in South Asia, it must match its strategic mentioning also with a lot of intellectual heavy lifting and diplomatic legwork that needs to be done. We have not seen that happening within South Asia on the part of Russia. For example, the Russian foreign minister probably making visits to different SAARC countries from time to time. Or for example, when President Putin comes to South Asia, particularly to India, he joins India along with another stop in South Asia, which is often done by President Xi Jinping or other leaders who come here. So I think there needs to be political and diplomatic legwork that needs to be done before one can really see a certain seriousness on the part of Moscow with regard to getting along with South Asia. And I do believe that Russian focus, every time we look at Russian focus in South Asia, it tends to give the impression it's more topical and more individual country based than having a pan-South Asia strategic context. So even today, for example, when you look at Russia's South Asia policy, much of it is spoken either in the context of Russia's imperatives in Afghanistan and how it wants to see stabilization and pacification of Afghanistan, or it is seen largely in the context of its equations with India, which have been long-standing, and it would like it to play a larger role. So in this context, what are the Russian dilemmas in South Asia? And I think there are 6 or 7 of them. The first is, how does it build its relationship with New Delhi going forward? New Delhi is a designated strategic privileged partner for Russia, not only within South Asia, but beyond. But the fact remains that if Russia wants to carve out a larger role for itself in South Asia, that obviously needs to happen in a very plausible manner with at least consensus, if not conjunction with India. They may not be able to see eye to eye on everything in South Asia, but a Russian policy of accommodation within South Asia would need facilitation by New Delhi, which would require both of them to have a very clear and a crisp dialogue on where exactly they see each other in terms of South Asia policy. The second dilemma really is the Chinese ingress, and we have to accept this. China shares a border with 5 South Asian countries, but almost has an outsized role with every country in the region outside of India. And so as a result of that, China's ingress now in South Asia is not just penetrative, but it's also in a sense irreversible. You can't wish it away. Now the question arises, in the context of this, how does Russia see itself? Does it want to essentially leverage its ties with China for a larger role in South Asia? Or is it going to still say that we want to break out of the shadow of Beijing and be able to carve out a role for itself? Because if it wants to ride or if it wants to piggyback Beijing in South Asia, then that relationship obviously is not going to be a relationship of equals, because any partnership or semblance of partnership with China is rarely about peer power parity. It's always about playing second fiddle to Beijing's central role. So any kind of South Asia role for Russia with China is obviously going to place Moscow at a certain degree of handicap. The third is, we have seen a certain consistent pattern with Russian policy over the last few years. And it basically has been either to occupy the strategic vacuum that the Americans vacate, or in terms of trying to balance off US in certain important geopolitical theaters. And I think here it's very important to again try and understand that is Russia's potential involvement in South Asia more to occupy the strategic vacuum left by America in certain theaters in South Asia, like Afghanistan, or is it in a larger context to balance the US's reinsertion back into South Asia, which has been happening lately in conjunction with India? And I mentioned particularly here the Indo-Pacific context, because you've seen over the last few months, Sri Lanka has gone and signed a status of forces agreement with US. You have Maldives, who has signed a military defense agreement with the US. Both of them allow their islands to be used as potential staging bases for the United States. So you will have a larger US role within South Asia, particularly within maritime and peninsula South Asia. And just a few weeks ago, we had Defense Secretary Esper call up Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh and offer a large defense agreement between United States and Bangladesh. So in this context, where does Russia see itself? Does it see itself as a stability anchor within the South Asian context vis-a-vis the US, or does it essentially want to occupy the strategic vacuum? The fourth is, I see a greater potential and a greater role for Russia within the maritime context of the Indian Ocean, because that is where consistently Russian naval doctrine, right up to 2020 and beyond, has talked of the need to get an enduring presence in the Indian Ocean. Now, here again, it's going to be extremely difficult and very delicate, because on the one hand, Russia so far has shown an inclination to work alongside China in the Indian Ocean in terms of its military exercises or maritime exercises, which it conducts largely in the Indian Ocean, including the Western Indian Ocean. At the same time, it has also very clearly denounced, or it has decried, the Indo-Pacific construct which the Quad countries have put together. This is what Foreign Minister Lavrov said at the Raisina dialogue earlier this year. So in this context, what kind of a balance is Russia going to find? Is it going to be part of the Chinese construct of the Indian Ocean and maritime South Asia? Or is it going to try and be some kind of a balancer, some kind of a conduit between the Quad's role in maritime South Asia and China's desire to be the dominant player within this place? There is also the fourth point of a larger grand strategy that Russia needs to have. Russia for now is talking individual sectoral cooperation with specific South Asian countries. But if you look at some of the major powers involved in South Asia, whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's United States, Japan, etc., they all seem to have a South Asia doctrine, if not exclusive, at least predominant. For example, India has its Sagar initiative, which is security and growth for all in the region, which is an Indian Ocean strategy based around its South Asian dominance. You have China, which has the Maritime Silk Road and the Belt and Road Initiative, which really comes into it. You have US talking of Blue Dot Network, which is going to be a new US-led infrastructural initiative, largely for South Asia and Southeast Asia. You also have Japan that has got involved in a big way with India through the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. Do we have any equivalent of this coming out of Moscow? And I think Russia will need to look at this factor as well if it wants to really have a serious play within the strategic calculus of South Asia. The fifth point really is that in recent times, Russia has been asking India to formally integrate itself with the Eurasian Economic Union. And it often sees India as a kind of a stepping stone springboard for its relationship in South Asia. Most recent conversations between Russia and India have figured around this initiative. While India has been ready to integrate the INSTC, which is the International North-South Transport Corridor, with the Eurasian Economic Union, a larger kind of integration with the Eurasian Economic Union, India seems to be telling Russia that should be blended with reciprocity of Russian flexibility with regard to the Indo-Pacific. Because India believes in a concept of free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific, and we would like to see Russia play a larger role within the Indo-Pacific alongside us, in return for which we could think of actually having formal integration with the Eurasian Economic Union. The sixth point is what happened on the 4th of August. For the first time, we had a trilateral conversation, of course, at the officials level, between India, Russia, and Japan. And this is interesting because last year, Prime Minister Modi was at the Vladivostok Eastern Economic Forum. In the context of that, we have the Vladivostok-Chennai, economic corridor between Russia and India. But now we are talking of all these three countries working together. Now, the initial focus is on working on Russia's Far East and developing the infrastructure in Russia's Far East. But this could be translated into a very effective Russian counter strategy within South Asia, because increasingly India and Japan are teaming up on infrastructure building and strategic connectivity pathways within South Asia and Southeast Asia, most notably through the Act East Forum that India and Japan have, and also blending it with the Japan-Mekong Cooperation Corridor. I think if this particular trilateral with Japan and Russia can go forward, then Russia could actually look to team along with India and Japan to be able to build some kind of strategic role for it also in South Asia, particularly in the Himalayan region of South Asia, Peninsula region of South Asia, and also Southeast Asia, which is the Mekong corridor. And the last point really is that at the end of the day, for now and for the foreseeable future, Russian policy seems to be coalesced around its policy on Afghanistan. It's extremely important for Russia to see that Afghanistan is stabilized. You've seen how the Russians have tried to take the ascendancy after they felt that China was taking the ascendancy. But that requires Russia to work with both China and Pakistan. And it is this factor that is going to actually create a lot of stresses and strains in Russian policy. How do they balance the need to work with China and Pakistan in Afghanistan and in Iran? At the same time, in the broader context of South Asia, how does Russia work with other players, thereby neither having a China-driven policy, not having an India-driven policy, but actually having a Russia-first policy in South Asia? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Parulikar, for your views on both the SAARC development and Russia's policies and Russia's, well, I'd say critic analysis of Russia's policy in the region. And I will be happy to hear the perspectives of Russian scholars on these points and these ideas later in the discussion. And before I give floor to our next speakers, I would like to remind our audience who follows us on YouTube or Facebook that there is an opportunity to ask questions, and after the main part of the discussion, we will try to read the questions out to our distinguished speakers. And now I'm happy to give floor to our next speaker, Ms. Elena Shavlai from GIMO University. Please, Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I have prepared a short presentation today, which is just for the sake of making more illustrative. Right. Okay. So here we go, and I'd like to attempt to answer a very Russian, to my mind, question, what is to be done, which was raised by Nicola Chernyshevsky. But today I'll try to apply that question to the situation around Russia and South Asia relations. Okay. So when I first received the letter inviting me to deliver a speech today, I found out that the most typical articles on Russia and South Asia deal with definitely political and security issues, geopolitical concepts, trade and economy, nuclear cooperation, and many other fields. And though one field remains largely overlooked until now. So I decided that my story would be different. At the picture, you see three Indian actors, who actually are probably one of the most famous abroad, Rani Mukherjee, Shah Rukh Khan, and Kajol. So actually, my interest in India's culture started with not with some political field or the economy. Rather, I was interested in India's culture, and I studied at the Higher School of Economics, and our campus was situated right across the street from the Indian Embassy. So we held different cultural events together. And from that period, I decided that India would be the country I would like to specialize in. Later on, I participated in different events of the Russian International Affairs Council, which actually learned me that my country, unfortunately, still lives with stereotypes of India. There is a lack of interest, sometimes disregard, ignorance, and basically up till now, its cooperation with India and South Asian countries in general is still limited to nuclear issues, to political relations, to some security aspects and so on. So of course there is no master key to how to solve the problem, but as far as I'm concerned, social sciences could be the driver for us to understand each other better and to actually break all these prejudices against each other, letting other people know what's happening, what's going on in the region. That's still a problem that we do not really have good language schools related to Indian languages or the languages of the region in general. Though if we take a look at our past, well, our history of relations, we exchanged pretty frequently in the educational field. We had academic cooperation. We had we sent our movies and theater and circuses and all that stuff to the countries of the region. So in my view, the main point is that the most overlooked area, which is now culture and social cooperation between our populations, could be, you know, like a driver towards enabling us solving other issues as well. Unfortunately, the Indologists are really limited in number in my country, let alone those who specialize in South Asia. And before that, in the USSR, you probably know that social sciences were more or less praised, and we have a really good school of Oriental studies. And unfortunately, Tatiana Lvovna is not present today, but she is one of those well-established authors who dedicated her life to studying India and the region. So to my mind, we really have to pay more attention to this particular area. I would tell you that I've heard a story of one of our colleagues who worked at the Russian embassy in India, and she was actually pretty much shocked when she encountered a woman who told her that in her village, the generations of Indians really tried to keep the Soviet fairy tales, which were translated into Hindi. As far as, well, they were never reproduced later on. So this book dates back to 1950s, 1960s, and therefore, if we do not raise the new generation with the understanding of, you know, the proximity of our mentalities, the proximity of our cultures, we cannot really tell them that, well, Russia is a friend and we should build cooperation and continue on realizing the joint project or joint plans. Because unfortunately, in my country, as well as what I see from based on the articles, the younger generation in India and in South Asia in general, they are already all about the United States, you know, about American values, American style of life. While to my mind, we have to really cultivate our relationship based on the joint understanding, probably, of how to deal with different issues. It's not necessarily about, you know, how to behave towards your parents or towards, you know, your colleagues, but it's in terms of populations. We hear it pretty frequently is that India is far away, well, long distance. We don't know how to improve sometimes our trade relations due to some logistical problems. Yet it's not really economy and logistics that brings people together. It's culture and historical awareness and the understanding of how really close we should be and we were. At the slide, you may see the picture showing India and Russians, which says Indians, Russians, Pai Pai. So Hindi, Russi, Pai Pai. It actually, to my, well, in my view, is the essence of what we lost and what we should recover. Okay, and I would like to finish with a quote from Rabindranath Tagore. Let us unite, not in spite of our differences, but through them. Differences can never be wiped away, and life would be so much the poorer without them. Let all human races keep their own personalities and yet come together, not in a uniformity that is dead, but in a unity that is living. So I suggest that we should bring hearts together and dare that could be the first step towards improving our relations in other fields. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena, for your perspective. I think for viewing from a different point our Russian relation with India and with South Asian states, it is true that culture and people-to-people contacts are very important, and we cannot discuss only strategic dynamics or economic cooperation, but we should also take into account the willingness of the goodwill of the peoples of the countries towards one another. And now I'm happy to give floor to Ms. Roy, Research Associate from Delhi Policy Group. Please, Ms. Roy, the floor is yours.
Can you please allow me to share my screen?
Just a moment.
Yeah. Okay. Can everybody see this, like my presentation?
Yes, we see it.
Okay. My presentation is divided into, I think Datesh sir has given such a broad and enriching, and he has given such a deep outline that I don't really need to talk about the backdrop. So I rather would just touch upon the frameworks, the existing frameworks of their bilateral relations. And in the second phase, I will just talk about the contexts, which is the Russia and India's, what is Russia's attitude towards India's strategic adversaries like China and Pakistan. Very shortly, I will touch upon US factor in India-Russia relations and way forward. So just a very short outline of their bilateral relationship in the existing framework. With its complex geopolitical positioning, South Asia is one of the most sought after strategic space in the world. Hence, it is important to look at the binary of bilaterals and multilaterals in the region. One of the most important bilateral relationship in the region is that of India-Russia. The discourse of their bilateral relations runs so deep that it can be traced before and as well as like India's post-independence period. The Indo-Russian Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation is a testimony to that. Spanning over 7 decades, in the present scenario, Russia continues to be a time-tested, assured partner. Under Narendra Modi-led government, the relation has deepened further. Russia's, like Prime Minister Narendra Modi's led government, Russia's broader geopolitical aspirations and economic pursuits is at the center of its South Asian diplomacy. Meanwhile, India's strategic choices are driven by its objective to secure itself and promote its national interests in a grossly unbalanced strategic environment. Talking about the relationship in the current discourse, India's Act Far East policy marks India's economic diplomacy towards Russia. Also, it gives the opportunity to India to act as a balancer in Far East. While their relationship has grown over the time in defense and energy sector and anti-terrorism and space, a lot has to grow in the economic domain too. They must spot the important areas of mutual interest and expertise to take further the engagement. For example, both countries can collaborate in public utility, healthcare, dairy, pulp industry, agriculture, hospitality sector. Talking about Far East, exploring diamond mining and trade is an area in which both countries can collaborate. Whether an EU-India free trade area flourishes, time will tell. India and Russia shares platform of RIC, BRICS, and SEO, which enables them to engage multilaterally and carry on dialogue. And India and Russia already has important projects, connectivity projects like North-South Transport Corridor and Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor, at a later stage, India can explore the North-South transport corridor to put up a counterbalancing strategy to China's polar Silk Road. India, Russia share a robust defense partnership. It is guided by the military technological cooperation. Russia remains India's biggest arms supplier. Even in the domain of space cooperation, their relationship has opened up avenues. So I have just touched upon the some of the data, which is very easily available in the open domain, and these are some of the components of the bilateral trade, that what are the main areas where they are engaging in trade, whether it's import or export. And Russia is India's largest arms supplier, which is one of the core element of their robust defense relationship. As I mentioned that the training of Indian astronauts in the Russian mission, India is open for Russian companies to participate in the opportunities in the space sector in India, including private sector companies, to form joint ventures with the Indian partners and take their cooperation forward. Moving on to the final segment, where I talk about the setting the context, that in what broader context, how its relationship is set. So it has to start with the Russia-Pakistan, where we see Russia has a nascent defense relationship with Pakistan. But upon India's request, it has agreed to not carry on with any arms sales to Pakistan. In fact, during the NSA virtual meet of SCO that happened this early month, Pakistan tried to present a fictitious map. The Indian side left the meeting midway to protest. Russia's Secretary of National Security Council conveyed it does not support the act. So, meanwhile, Russia and Pakistan can be seen conducting some multinational military drills like Caucasus 2020 and Caucasus 2020, and India withdrew from the Caucasus. Coming to the Russia-China relations, with a checkered past, China is now Russia's largest trading partner. A lot has been discussed about China's friendship with Russia. Moscow has been consistently referred to as the most integral partner by Beijing. However, there has been inconsistencies in expression regarding Russia's bonhomie with China. President Vladimir Putin describes ties with China and alliance-like relationship, pushing for economic and political engagement with the BRI by promoting its compatibility with Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union. However, there is barely any evidence to show that Russia is an official partner in BRI. According to a foreign policy report in 2019, by 2019, China had yet to deem any of the union's projects worthy of BRI label. Of 40 transportation projects proposed by EEU to China in 2017, every single one was rejected. In fact, in one of those reports, there is a senior fellow from Moscow State Institute of International Relations said, Russia is not part of the BRI. It is only a supporter of Chinese global outreach as long as it is Russia's interest. Meanwhile, Chinese investment in the region is raising fears of China's growing presence in the Russian Far East. Interestingly, Russia has not yet recognized Chinese claims in South China Sea. Neither China has endorsed Russian takeover of Crimea. Whether it's 4,300 kilometers common border or competing claims in Central Asia, China, Russia has common irritants in the relationship. Coming to US factor in the India-Russia relations, despite the fissures in India-Russia relations, India has made it clear that its relation with Russia will remain independent of US policy. Due to India's insistence, US Congress made some room to exempt India from the plausible sanction, taking into account its long-term impact. Here I would just want to add that while it is important for India to work with Russia and US, it is imperative for US to not constrain the diplomatic space too much for Russia, as it will only ensure a formalized Sino-Russian Atat. India, being a natural ally, close partner to US, can be of help here. And secondly, as I discussed the discourse, the trajectory of China-Russia relations very shortly, there are clear dents in Sino-Russian friendship. The magnified impression of their friendship is primarily based on each other's interest in trade and economics and American distrust. So Sino-Russian relations is marked by growing asymmetry and Chinese preeminence. That's where India comes in as an assured partner. Coming to the way forward, Russia-India relations is time-tested and it doesn't implicate to threaten each other's national interest. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi-led government has successfully carved out a space amidst US sanction and Russia-Sino ties, wherein Russia has emerged as a trusted friend. Russia's long-standing support on India's position on Jammu and Kashmir, permanent membership of United Nations, entry into NSG, and prove that Russia is an all-weathered friend for India. However, both sides need to address certain aspects primary to their respective national interests. I was going through this interview of Dmitry Trenin, director of the Carnegie Moscow Center. He has pointed out that there are two irritants in India-Russia relation. Inability of both Moscow and New Delhi, despite their goodwill and traditional friendship, to expand their cooperation beyond the government-led sectors and to engage broader sections of society. I think he didn't consider that India has actually opened up, and even in the space cooperation sector, it has invited private sector and private members to come and engage in joint ventures. And two, India's rekindled rivalry with China, Russia being close to both without a chance to mediate. Meanwhile, Dhruva Jaishankar, who is another foreign policy expert, has taken note of India's concerns, and in a very recent article, he has pointed out that Moscow should also take note of certain Indian concerns, like Moscow's accommodating approach to Taliban in Afghanistan, resistance to Indo-Pacific concept, high technology military deals with China, nascent defense relation with Pakistan to preserve a robust relationship. India's initiative to maneuver Russia, meanwhile, in Indo-Pacific and ensure it to join and pursue it to join India, Japan, Russia trilateral is a good decision. Although Russia is highly critical of Indo-Pacific concept, its proactive presence in the region with port calls in Sri Lanka and Pakistan, naval drills with China in South Africa and Iran in North Indian Ocean, Moscow has already made its choice of emboldening its strategic posture in the region, sending a signal to the United States. While Russia's balancing intent between China and US is clear, it needs strong naval capabilities. While it relies on China, a possible India-Japan-Russia trilateral can balance the gap. While Russia is not going to adhere to Indo-Pacific concept anytime soon, both countries must find new avenues to continue their extraordinarily steady bilateral relationship, as commented by our EAM Jaishankar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and Gana, for your very interesting intervention and your perspective on Russia-India relations. Well, definitely India is the main Russia's partner in the South Asia. And now I think I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers for their remarks. And now we could proceed with the discussion. And but before that, I would like to ask Dr. Alexey Kupriyanov to comment on the strategic dynamics in the region and the points and ideas put forward by Dr. Parulikar dealing with Russia's foreign policy in South Asia. Please, Alexey and Angana, if you could please close the presentation as we are seeing it now.
I'm just trying. If you can just close the sharing the thing. Just a second.
Okay, is it okay?
Thanks.
Well, I'd like
please,
to
Alex,
add,
thanks.
I think I'd like to add some point, maybe in answer to words of my distinguished Indian colleague. First of all, Russia has its own role in South Asia. It doesn't depend on Russian relations with China, and this must be understood, because the problem is that Russia has no vital interest, a really vital interest in South Asia. It is interested in a strong player emerging there who would share its views on the future world order as a maybe multipolar, polycentric world order. So far, India looks like this player, but Russia is not happy that India growth as a regional player is accompanied by its clashes with China. So I also believe that Russia needs to be more, well, to have more high position in the Indian Ocean. I cannot say now how exactly Russia will be present there. We are now working on this. I hope Russia will choose the role of balancer in the Indian Ocean, friendly to both India and China. And so I'd like to add a few more words about the relations between Russia and Japan. We have been offering a trilateral format for several years. The main problem in this case is the position of the Japanese side, not Russian, not Indian. So I get the impression that the Japanese colleagues are simply afraid to promote the trilateral format, fearing maybe American disapproval. And I'd like, well, to add a few words about Russia-Chinese relations. During the Cold War, Russia had a lot of disputes, a lot of problems with China. In the late 1880s, these problems were settled. And Russia sees itself as a great power, a separate force, as its role as an independent political role, and will never accept the role of Chinese junior ally. Therefore, Russian position on disputes in the South China Sea and in dispute in Himalayas is very balanced and aloof. In fact, there the Russian partner China is arguing with Russian friends, India and Vietnam. And Russia is interested in the problem being resolved as quickly as possible to a general satisfaction. Some words about Russian position on the Pacific. Russia's slowness to participate in the Pacific concept proceeds from the fact that Russia has no interest in the Pacific generally, except the North Pacific. No interest in Western Pacific and Southern Pacific, and no interest in the Indian Ocean, in fact, so far. Why would Moscow irritate China by creating its own, maybe in the Pacific projects, in discussing the Pacific projects, but it has no benefit from this, no immediate benefit. I'm personally a big supporter of Russian creation of independent Russian concept of Indo-Pacific, independent Russian view, independent Russian strategy. But, well, I'm also a realist and I'm not policymaker. I understand that our policymakers are more interested in Arctic, for example, Arctic seas and North Pacific seas and North Atlantic than in very distant Indian Ocean. So it was, they were my points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei, for giving your perspective and your feedback on the ideas put forth by Dr. Parlikar. And now I'd like to remind all the audience who follows us live and on YouTube that you have an opportunity to ask questions. We will read out them. If you have any, so far we haven't received any questions. But we have a question to address to Dr. Parlikar by one of our colleagues, Ms. Alevtina Larionova from Russian International Affairs Council. And the question deals with your mention of Russia, India, Japan trilateral engagement. And she kind of asked you to comment on the recent dynamics of the three-party activities in the Russian Far East and to give your perspective as to whether you see some changes in the nearest future due to the departure of Prime Minister Abe from power. And well, do you see this initiative as mainly put forth by the goodwill and good relations of the leaders, or do you see that it could produce some tangible benefits for the countries?
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for the question. I think there are a number of different dimensions to basically answer this question. The first is the logic of this trilateral. Now, the logic of this trilateral is quite congruent to India's understanding of the Indo-Pacific. Because in 2018 June, when Prime Minister Modi addressed the inaugural session of the Shangri-La Dialogue, he in fact added in his address one more term to the existing lexicon of the Indo-Pacific construct. Until then, it was called the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. But India said we would like to believe that this is not just a free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, it is also a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific strategy. And our idea, strategic idea behind inclusion was to reach out to both China and Russia and to let them know that this particular grouping of the Quad, or if what that might be even Japan, America, and India, is not necessarily to deny anybody exclusivity in the Indo-Pacific. So I believe that the strategic forum, or the trilateral, which has had its first meeting, of course, video conference of the senior officials, is to take forward that vision of India. Now, in terms of what it can do, what the trilateral can do, the obvious emphasis for now, obviously, is on the Russian Far East. Because as I said, this comes from last year's visit of Mr. Modi to Vladivostok for the Eastern Economic Forum. And on the sidelines of that, India and Russia had its own summit, where we actually put in place the Vladivostok-Chennai sea corridor. Now, this gives India greater play in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. It, in a sense, legitimizes India's movement along these trajectories. But the focus recently was on the Russian Far East. How can India and Japan contribute in terms of growing the island infrastructure and the infrastructure on the Russian Far East? But I see potential for this to be a springboard in the future, that if this trilateral goes forward and is able to consolidate itself, then it could actually help Russia chart its own policy in the Indo-Pacific without having to piggyback on someone. Because I believe that the India-Japan partnership across the maritime space is a genuine partnership of equals, where both sides are coming to the table and are offering their own share of tangibles. And I believe that given the focus that Russia has not only on South Asia, but increasingly is looking to also engage with peninsular Southeast Asia, which is from Myanmar all the way to Vietnam, this would actually help to complement Russia's engagement, not just with countries of the Himalayan South Asia or the peninsular South Asia, but also in terms of the entire stretch leading into the Mekong corridor all the way up to Vietnam. As far as Japan's involvement is concerned, I think we obviously have to wait and see what the pointers of the new prime minister are. For now, we know that he in many ways is a stopgap prime minister, because elections are due on September 21st next year. So for now, he's basically prime minister for 1 year. So it's a very short window. But having been a close associate of Prime Minister Abe, there is good reason to believe that there will be continuity rather than any kind of change in the policy of Prime Minister Suga when you compare it with Prime Minister Abe. And lastly, I would say, let's also keep in mind that Prime Minister Suga not only called up Prime Minister Modi, but recently also had a phone call with Prime Minister Putin. So he did have an early phone call with Prime Minister Putin. So and he's talked about basically trying to solve to grow in a solid trilateral for the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Perulikar, for your perspective and for your feedback on Alexei's position and Alevtina's questions. And now I think we have some time for discussion. And first, I would like to request our distinguished speakers to introduce any questions they may have for their counterparts and colleagues. So do you have any questions? So nobody has any questions. Then I'll ask, it's not, I think during all the presentations, we heard a lot of views were connected to the China's position and China's policies in the South Asia, overall in the world, and dealing with the growing US-China rivalry. And I would like all the speakers to elaborate more on this particular question in connection with the situation in the South Asia. So how do you think that China's so to say, more active policy, and China, the fact that China is now remained one of the most resilient players in the COVID-19 pandemic, and when the other countries have been hit more severely by the pandemic, how it could change China's policy in the South Asia. So first I would give floor in the order of the program to Alexei then. Your mic is off, please.
Well, is it okay? Okay.
It's fine.
Okay, and in fact, I see no reason why China has to change its position in South Asia, but I think it's very interesting the Chinese dynamics of Chinese point of view on the situation on the Himalayan border, because well, it's very it was quite unpredictable, the situation on the border, and it's quite hard to predict the future line of Chinese, Chinese policy toward border questions, border issues with India. I think that China will continue its line to the defending its sovereignty of the sovereignty of the border regions, well, as Chinese explained that. And I don't see any reason why China should stop its policy to continue of developing of its relations with Pakistan and with Indian Ocean countries. But as far as I saw before the beginning of COVID pandemic, China changed its strategic line in the Indian Ocean. So now China do not try to increase its presence in the Indian Ocean, because in any moment we see just 2, maybe 3 escort groups in Indian Ocean, and maybe just 1 division of Chinese ships in eastern part, and maybe 2 or 3 Chinese submarines. But now China tries to strengthen its connections with Indian Ocean countries, friendly Indian Ocean countries, such as Sri Lanka, such as Pakistan, such as Bangladesh and Myanmar, by providing them ships and training their crews. Because I think it's a long-term strategic idea, long-term strategic line that can connect to strengthen ties well between China and these countries, and to keep the line of Chinese communications safely. But it's my point of view. So I think that we'll see maybe a changing of Chinese position. We'll see keeping the Chinese line in the Indian Ocean the same, but at the same time, we will see the maybe a change in Chinese instruments in the Indian Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei, for your insight. And if I could just ask you one small question as to how do you assess the prospects of the India-China relation in the nearest future? So is it possible to have them at a higher level in the nearest, or this later tension will persist for a short while, at least for a short while?
Ksenia, I don't know, in fact, because, I just can remind you that before Wuhan summit, relations between China and India were not very warm. Well, and just Wuhan summit became a game changer, in fact, and because of Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping are quite strong leaders, I think we can see any unpredictable, I hope, that we will see any unpredictable step in their relations, and maybe we will see something like, well, Wuhan Summit #2, just in a few years. But, well, maybe it's wishful thinking, because now situation on the border doesn't give us any points for optimism.
Thank you so much, Alexei. And now I'd like to move on with my first question, dealing with future of China's policy and the effect of US, China, and India, and also India-China tensions on the situation and in South Asia. Please, Professor Purlikar, I would be grateful if you could also provide your perspective as to that.
Yeah, thank you. Look, even before the pandemic struck, the fact was that China's role in South Asia was growing. It was growing because China was the largest trading partner of Asia. It's the biggest portfolio investor across South Asia, and the heft of its trade and the pelf of its investment capacity clearly makes it a stakeholder in what happens in South Asia. Now, this is a reality. Having said that, let's also go back to 2014, which was the last SAARC summit which took place. At that particular SAARC summit, there was a lot of building pressure, which was breathing down India's neck, wherein smaller countries, certain smaller countries within South Asia, were pushing for formal inclusion of China within SAARC. And I think this also made India revisit some of its strategies, regarding SAARC in South Asia. So the whole idea of pursuing the SAARC -1 policy, which essentially excludes Pakistan and tries to take the rest of the SAARC community together, I think is also a reflection of that. But it faces severe pressures from the fact that whichever mechanism that India looks to use to maintain its centrality within South Asia, it will always feel pressures and fault lines from China, because whether it's BIMSTEC, whether it's SAARC -1, or any other forum, China seems to be breathing down heavy within South Asia. I would just have a little bit of disagreement with what Dr. Alexei said about China's role in the Indian Ocean. China would like to give us the impression that their role is not menacing and their role is very benign. But actually, the empirical data suggests otherwise. For example, and I'm somebody who works with the Indian Navy very closely, at any point of time, the Indian Navy has been tracking at least 6 Chinese warships or submarines in the Indian Ocean. And that is considered exceedingly high, and all of them are sneaking or lurking around India's exclusive economic zone. Secondly, over the last 2 years, I'm talking 18 and 19, before the pandemic, as many as 26 different Chinese surveillance vessels were observed from anywhere in the Bay of Bengal to the Western Indian Ocean, again trying to do ocean floor mapping of India's exclusive economic zone. So India has recognized that China is here to play high stakes, and it's here for the long haul. And in that context, the growth of India's relationship with the United States is only seen as a logical corollary of that kind of a fallout. But what India has done, we don't necessarily believe in the strategic triangulation and the zero-sum paradigm that plays within it. And that's why India, over the last few years, has been looking to use its centrality in the Indian Ocean and in the South Asian context to grow relations with other stakeholders within the Indian Ocean, believing in the pluralization of the Indian Ocean, which is why you see in recent times, we've not only been working on the strategic triangulation between Canberra, Jakarta, and Delhi, which is India, Indonesia, Australia. We've also been working on a trilateral between Australia, France, and India. And in recent times, we've seen how Germany also has decided to pitch its tent in the Indian Ocean. I think all that augurs well in terms of security and stability for the Indian Ocean and the larger South Asian context, because the more the players in the region, this kind of crowding will only allow for pluralization of the space and will prevent the space from actually become a singular hegemonic arena for any particular power. So I think it has to be seen in that context. Now, as far as India and China is concerned, the conducive environment doesn't exist right now. China has tended to be quite confrontational lately. And I would not just look only at what happened in Ladakh, because it has a backdrop context as well. Because for the few months before that, China has been constantly supporting Pakistan in the UN Security Council, looking to bring resolutions against India on what is an internal issue of Indian re-administration. And I thought President Putin handled the issue very delicately and very well when Russia stood by India in the UN Security Council, not once but twice, against China, saying what India had done was an internal affair of India's administrative jurisdiction. I also see President Putin having delicately navigated through the Ladakh crisis by declining China's nudge not to provide defense supplies to India and saying that the S-400 will remain on schedule to be delivered to India by the end of next year. At the same time, being a friend of both Beijing and Delhi, President Putin offered mediation, but did not do what Trump did with regard to India and Pakistan by actually saying, I will mediate. He said, we will be happy to mediate if the two countries would like to see us here. So I don't see it only as a kind of a US, China, India triangulation. There can also be an interesting triangulation of India, China, and Russia, which can also have important stakes in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Parulikar. It is very interesting to hear the Indian perspective because, of course, Russian experts see the situation in the region and China-India relations a bit from the outside. So definitely the perspective is very useful for us. And now I'll ask Ms. Shablai to follow up on these questions. Please, Elena.
Thank you very much. So, well, I'm now actually writing a PhD thesis on India's China policy. Well, as for the Indo-Pacific, that's the issue I'm now trying to study. Basically, to my mind, China has natural reasons for increasing its presence in the Indian Ocean. And though there is still probably the Indian perception of Chinese actions as, the desire probably to create the string of pearls, the infamous string of pearls. It doesn't really have enough evidence because, first of all, it's really expensive. To convert the economic ports into something of military nature. So it doesn't make any sense in economic terms, first of all. Then China and India, both countries have the largest populations in the world, and the energy demand is growing. So we all know that the sea lines are now the primary source of the energy sources. Therefore, it would be really convenient and probably China would feel more comfortable if all the shipments would be safe and sound. Therefore, I believe that India, China, and Russia should together work on the Indo-Pacific concept, which is now which now doesn't meet probably the needs of China. China and Russia both remain pretty cold towards the Indo-Pacific concept. We all know that, and our Foreign Minister Lavrov has frequently and repeatedly told that it's an American concept, therefore we will not, take it. But I think that probably this trilateral format may enable us to understand each other better in terms of how we see this regional order, first of all, then how we can cooperate together, because there are many issues which we can tackle together, like piracy, terrorism, drug trafficking. There are plenty of issues. So in my view, we should probably use to our utmost the format of Russia, India, China, which is now, unfortunately, largely remains more declarative than really bringing practical and tangible results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. And now I give floor to Ms. Roy, please, your perspectives on these issues.
Hello.
Yeah,
hello,
we can hear you.
Can you repeat? Actually the voice was on and off. So,
sorry. So our the issues I would like to discuss are, first of all, the changes in possible changes in China's policy in South Asia in the near future. So you predict some of them, and then how these China, US, and China India tension could affect the situation overall in South Asia, and whether you think it would be possible to alleviate these tensions to a certain extent.
am I audible? Okay, because I can't hear anything from that side. I just, okay, again, it got connected. Okay. I think that Tej sir has very, like, you know, he has covered it in a very broad perspective. I would just want to add that there is a clear Thucydides trap that is evident in the region. Thucydides trap is the clash between a rising power and an established power. So like here I'm talking about US and China. China has clearly, it has used BRI as its tool. Again, the problem with BRI is it's not a very well-defined, not a very well-coordinated policy. There is no ministry about it. So it's very loose, and there are lot of roadblocks and lots of like debt trap issues which are like, you know, emerging, which are coming like, you know, in the forefront. So the thing is that China has always given an impression of a very prominent as a dominating power, as not a very assured partner. And meanwhile, India is trying to deal with its in its own geopolitical position. It is trying to balance, not only balance, but right now I think after the Galwan issue, it has come like, you know, in the forefront, and Quad has become more you know, proactive in its rhetorical scope, where but the problem where, like, because we are discussing Russia, Russia is because again Russia has its own limitations with the sanctions it is facing, and kind of its primary interest is economic pursuit, and also come up with its own favorable strategic positioning in the region. It has to somewhere conveniently balance between all the powers. So I think that in that perspective, India and Russia, it should continue to explore, as I pointed out in my own conclusion, should continue to explore different avenues, and because they have like, I'm not saying that Russia has like, you know, has anywhere, it has always said that it's China is its special partner, but there are common irritants, and if India and Russia can find out some scope, mutual scope of those common irritants, and come together and explore their own mutual interest through their own expertise and national interest, then it's better. And anyway, because in India's India first policy and India's own strategic priority of a rule-based order can only survive with its own assured partners. In that case, it's Russia, in Japan, US, Australia, Vietnam, Indonesia. So if we can create a well coordinated Asian balance of power, and you know, provide a stronger front towards China, then we can actually handle the Thucydides traps in a better way. So I think that is my perspective. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Angana, for your views. And now we have received one comment and one question on the YouTube chat. I will read them out. And once again, I will give 1 or 2 minutes to all the speakers to give their perspectives, and I think we could make these remarks also the concluding remarks for our seminar. So the first is a comment by Mr. Han. He says that Russia needs to be more active in South Asia besides its partnership with India and Pakistan and participation in Afghanistan affairs. Moscow needs to get involved more with smaller SAARC countries. And the second one is a question by Ms. Nimesh Babu Oli. And it reads as, at a time when India's willingness to engage economically, strategically, and military with the US, and Pakistan is willing to engage with China and other SAARC nations' engagement with economic issues, how will Moscow present itself as a relevant power for engagement in the South Asian region in the coming decades if it is declining economically? So I think we could go once again in the order of the program. So first, Alexei, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, but I'd like again to make a remark about the words of Mr. Parulekar. Can I?
Sure, you could make
okay, thank you. But first of all,
you could both answer.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to answer to the question on YouTube. It seems to me a mistake to assert categorically that Russia's economic power will decline, because the power of a country is a relative concept, and we can see serious changes in the position in Russia, and we can well see economic growth in perspective. So I think that now we can't say that Russia will try to manage its position in South Asia as a declining power, maybe as a rising power. And so I'd like to say some words about words of Mr. Parulekar. So Dr. Parulekar mentioned some 6 Chinese ships. 6 warships is a very small presence, I think. This was shown by the Maldives crisis when only 8 Chinese ships to escort groups were in the Indian Ocean. At the same time, it will take the Indian Navy 10 minutes to sink these 8 ships. In my opinion, the main problem is Sino-Indian relations is a complete lack of mutual understanding and mutual trust, because China is trying to secure its supply line while India suspects China of trying to strangle it at sea and interprets any Chinese action as a threat to its security. This is a very dangerous way. We took it during the Cold War. Overestimating the strength and aggressiveness of the enemy is just as dangerous as underestimating, because you spend your resources, you spend your attention on confronting an imaginary threat like Star Wars or String of Pearl, and as a result, you do not have enough of them, enough of your resources for your inner development. From my point of view, the presence of Russia in the Indian Ocean maybe can just solve this problem, since Russian ships in the Indian Ocean do not arouse Indian suspicions. At the same time, China will maybe feel calm. But we are running out of time, I'm afraid, and I sincerely hope that after the pandemic subsides, we can discuss this issue with Dr. Parulekar in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexei. And now I'm happy to give floor to Dr. Parulekar.
Thank you. I'll address the issue of Dr. Alexei a little later at the very end. But let me say this. I do believe that that's exactly what I said in my presentation, that Russia will now have to take a strategic outlook on South Asia. Does it want its South Asia policy essentially to be seen from the prism of India-Pakistan relations, or from the prism of its imperatives in Afghanistan? Or does it really want to chart a South Asia-wide policy that doesn't look at South Asia only in geopolitical terms? And this is a submission I'm making at this presentation, that in keeping with functional cooperation and the strategies that are newly coming, I think Russia has to look very clearly at issues of connectivity, at how these connectivities are not only South Asia specific, but they link South Asia with Central Asia and Southeast Asia, and how Russia can participate in that. At the same time, Russia can bring some of its own exclusive core competencies in the area of science and technology, in the area of energy development, in the area of nuclear energy, for example. And these could actually become very emblematic areas of Russian involvement, because as Dr. Alexei rightly said, Russian presence in South Asia does not spook India, because we've had a certain trust that we have built with Russia. The same thing can't be said with China. And I think you ask any of the Southeast Asian neighbors, what do they think of China's presence and China's patrol within the maritime space? And they'll come back to you and say, look, Chinese actions, no matter what they may say, don't necessarily breed confidence. So I think where China loses out is in terms of its actions being the exact opposite of its pronouncements. Whereas in the case of Russia, we do accept that Russia has a role to play. In fact, we welcome the very fact that Russia should be part of an Indo-Pacific construct. That is precisely why Prime Minister Modi went out of his way to say, we don't accept the US-Japanese formulation of a free and open Indo-Pacific only. For us, the Indo-Pacific construct is not exclusive, it is inclusive. It includes all possible stakeholders who have vital interests in the Indian Ocean. And that is why in 2018, after the Shangri-La dialogue, the Indian Foreign Ministry proposed a maritime dialogue with Beijing and Moscow, of course, individually, to try and assuage some of the concerns that these countries had. So in terms of Russia playing a role in the Indo-Pacific, that is welcomed by Delhi. And I think that has to be the anchor of any South Asia policy for Russia, because I can't imagine Russia having a Himalayan South Asian policy and that being the linchpin of its South Asia policy, because it doesn't have connectivity pathways, it's a faraway neighbor. But the fact that it can play a role in the larger issue of global commons gives Russia also this ability play its role in the area of global governance.
Dr. Perlikar, there was some kind of a technical glitch at the end of your speech. I think the last 30 seconds. Could you please repeat?
Okay, yeah. So what I was actually saying was that the presence of Russia within the Indian Ocean is seen as a positive influence, not just towards stabilizing the Indian Ocean, but also in terms of Russia playing its role as a stakeholder within global governance. Because India's idea of the maritime space is one of the global, which is why India's whole argument of the free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific actually includes having a dialogue with Beijing and with Moscow about trying to find a certain why media about how this particular issue can be resolved amicably without having to escalate tensions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Perlikar. And now I'm happy to give floor to Elena Shablai to answer these questions and give the concluding remark, please.
Okay, so from my perspective, answering the questions raised on YouTube, I believe, right? As relates to the more active role of Russia in Asia by dealing with South Asian countries. So from my perspective, the first thing, the first step, I intentionally dedicated my presentation to that issue is to study these countries. You will hardly find many experts in these in Russia who really specialize in South Asia. So first of all, let's study the region. Let's create the interest, because now it seems that unfortunately Russians are more into, European studies, the United States, but by the way, that was part of the reason why I chose India, as opposed to, this mainstream studies. So to my mind, first of all, let's study the countries. Then I totally agree with Professor Perlikar that Russia should have a larger grand strategy, should elaborate it really thoroughly, not by, declaring that we are friends and we have a long history of being friends with India. Well, if we cannot really have many experts on India as, being the biggest country in the region, well, what can we say about other countries, right? The smaller ones. And then again, even really coming back to India-China relations, I was surprised when I decided to write an article on India-China cultural relations, cultural ties, they're almost not existent. Okay, so like you do not find many sinologists in India, and on the other hand, many experts in India in China. And this is an overall problem which actually leads to negative outcomes in other fields. We cannot say that it's the only reason, right? But first of all, let's change the perception of each other. Let's study each other. And probably that would be the key driver to understanding the prospects we may have and cooperate on other issues, as well as those of social sciences. It was a very good, really good Soviet School of Oriental Studies, and we now have Indian Study Center. So most of it consists of those who studied India for, I don't know, like 30, 40, 50 years. And my scientific advisor, Professor Lunov, is one of those as well. So lacking experts, lacking interest, not showing what's going on in Asia and in India in particular, or in other South Asian countries, we cannot achieve tangible results. If you just take a look at the news we have here on our Russian channels, you would hardly find any news related to India if it's not, you know, like a great summit, or, well, I once was really surprised seeing one piece of news on India, just because our ships then went to Syria. And then, you know, all this stuff around Syrian conflict, you know, in my view, unless we change these perceptions, the situation around our social sciences and our studying, we cannot expect any results in other fields as well.
Thank you so much, Elena. I think this is a very important issue you have highlighted, that the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding, and to a certain extent a lack of interest, which is partly shown by it, very negatively affect our international cooperations in Russia-India relations, Russia-South Asia relations in particular, in the long term. And I think, which is very important that you highlighted the need to study these countries, and also such dialogues as the one we are now holding, I think, are also very useful in gaining more understanding of each other positions, which would, I hope, help us to alleviate possible tensions and foster mutually beneficial collaboration. And finally, I'm happy to give floor to Ms. Angana Roy for her final remarks and answers to our questions.
I have only 3 points to just mention, and I completely agree with Elena that it's very important to understand each other to, you know, take forward any kind of relationship. While doing my research, I like, you know, it's also like we are very we know that India-Russia relationship is like, it's a robust relationship when it comes to Russia's South Asian diplomacy. It's yet to explore or deepen its ties with other South Asian countries, like it's doing in Nepal. It's exploring the hydrocarbon energy. It's having the helicopter, like the deals. Then when it comes to Sri Lanka, it's doing something in Sri Lanka. It's also trying to deepen its relation in Bangladesh. So it has not like, you know, to build the volume of the relationship, knowing each other is very important. Second point is that because Russia is very rich in natural resources, and it's a defense hard power. So these two should be the, like, you know, these two are very important areas of areas to reach out and to, you know, to build relationship with in the South Asian frame, like, you know, domain. And third, the most important, which I feel, is that Russia has consistently, irrespective of the dents that we analyze and point out, Russia has consistently always emphasized on its special relationship with China. So what I feel is that whenever it is trying to engage with the South Asian countries, who are India's neighbor, like in India's neighborhood, they should do it from a very individualistic perspective. From an individual, I understand the favorable balance of powers that are in interplay when it comes to its own relationship with China, but because they have, like we have also our mutual our national interest, so that should be taken into consideration. And like it could be a little more flexibility can be played out, like there should be some less rigidity about maintaining the position about friendship and equations and all, and Russia can be a little more flexible while carving out its position in the Indo-Pacific construct. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angana, for for sharing your views. And with that, I think we can conclude our webinar. And first of all, I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers from Russia and India who provide their positions and their very interesting, sometimes different and divergent views on the situation in South Asia, Russia's role in South Asia, and also to a certain extent on Russia-India relations. And I would like to thank all our colleagues and partners at the Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs from Nepal, and my colleagues from Russian International Affairs Council who assisted in preparing and conducting this event. And also a big thank you to our audience who followed us on YouTube and on Facebook Live. And thank you so much once again for the participation.
Thank you very much.